Hi, this is Andy Hahn, and this is episode 18 of Guided Self Healing, Fearless Living. And in this episode, we're going to talk about our most basic human needs, which in the Enneagram are called subtypes. So, if you recall, we've already been through two levels of the Enneagram, what are called centers, which are our most basic perceptual modes. It's how we perceive the world. And we said there were three ways. We could perceive through the heart, which means I want to have a good feeling in my heart. So, do you approve of me or do you like me? We can perceive through the head, which is scanning for danger. And, is the world a dangerous place? And where's the danger going to come from? Or we can perceive through our bellies, which means that we sense what's going on and then we respond in some kind of way. So there are three basic ways of doing this. And we said there were energetics to those ways, that the heart center, lacking a head or lacking having a no head as a core fear, loses itself forward and out, seeking approval and losing discernment. And we said the head points lose themselves back and in because, of course, they have a fear they are no body. And if you're no body, you have to get away from danger because you don't have enough energy. Um, and then we had the belly points. And what we said is the belly points energy goes up and diffuse. And we said, well, what does that mean? Because they're perceiving, they have a felt sense of things in terms of whatever they care about. But instead, we said the core fear of the belly points is I am no heart. And no heart here means I don't know my passion. I don't know what I truly desire. And so, in order to be fully embodied, you have to know what you truly desire and what your passion is. So, we talked about that, these basic perceptual modes and the ways we lose ourselves. And then we talked about our personality types, which is sort of, if you want to put it a certain way, it's our core ways of motivating, it's our core motivations, we could say. And it is also our fundamental ways of paying attention. Where does our attention go? And we said that there were 9 of these types, and there were 3 variations of each type within the centers. So in the heart, there's 2, 3, and 4, which are called the giver and the performer and the romantic. And we said that the giver, all of these points want approval for an image, right? So it's like in order not to feel despair, but we said the giver looks to the particular other and loses themselves forward and out, seeking the approval of the particular other, because if they have that, then they don't have to feel despair. They can feel worthy. And we talked about the performer. And again, the performer wants applause. So their attention as a heart point goes forward and out. But they go to the generalized other. They go for the whole crowd. They go for, and even if you're with a particular other, it's what they represent to you. It may not be their individuality. And then we talked, of course, about the romantic. And the romantic, even though it's a hard point and therefore wants approval and wants acceptance, they look for their image by going back and inside, and they look for an authentic image inside of themselves, which they then present to the world. And we hope at that point, if we're romantic, that the world is going to like us for our unique or special authentic quote unquote image, because of course it is. And we said the same thing about the head points. And we said, there were 3 head points, which are all variations of moving away from some kind of danger because there's a lack of some kind, a lack of energy, you could say. And the 5, of course, moves back and away from things, so backwards and in to a place in the sort of back of their head where they can just witness or observe everything and saying nothing can get to me because I built a castle around myself. And so I can witness and observe everything from there. And then we have the loyal skeptic. And the loyal skeptic, of course, again, a fear point goes back and away from things as a fear point, but dissociates, goes up and diffuse in terms of their point, meaning that when something dangerous is coming at them, their first move is to sort of like leave their bodies almost. And then from there, they can do fight, flight, or freeze, but their first move is sort of like deer in headlights kind of move. And then we said there was what's called the epicure or the adventurer, point 7. So we had 5, 6, and 7. And the epicure, we said again, is someone who's also a fear point, but they don't look like a fear point because they look like they just like pleasant options. So how is that a fear point? And we said, of course, the way it's a fear point is the one thing I do not want to have if I'm a 7 is I don't want to be bored, or I don't want to be trapped, or I don't want to feel any kind of painful feelings. So whenever anything like that's coming, I have to get away from it, and I will use my imagination or whatever it takes. So it's like I do an end run around the thing that I'm afraid of, and I don't even recognize that I'm afraid of it until it gets in my face, so to speak. And then we had the belly points, and we said there were 3 variations of the belly points, all of whom don't know their passion or their true heart's desire. And we said 8, which is called the protector, is the externalization of anger and self-forgetting. So 8's are the biggest energy of all points. They externalize their anger, and when we say they're self-forgetting. 8s are unbelievably competent, right, in everything they do. Pretty much, it's really quite extraordinary. And they're hierarchical, and they know what is most important and what isn't, and they know how to make things happen and get things done. But they don't ask the question, what do I really desire? What do I really want to do? I just do everything competently, so I just do it. But I never ask the question, do I really want to do it? Because that, of course, would cause us to go into the soft heart, and that's a vulnerable place to be. If I'm a protector, I don't like being vulnerable. And then we said there was the mediator. The mediator their energy goes up in diffuse. Or to put it differently, they dissociate anger. They don't recognize anger exists, and they identify with self-forgetting, which means that they forget that they've forgotten themselves. But what they do know is everybody else's point of view. So I sit at a table, I know your point of view and your point of view, and I can merge with all of them. But if someone said, well, what do you want? Well, never considered the question what I want independent of everybody else. It's hard to know because I've forgotten myself, but I feel forgotten. So they're called the invisible children, but they feel forgotten. But in fact, really, that's just a that's just what comes at the end of their lens, because truly they forget themselves and then tell them stories about how they've been forgotten. And then there is the internalization of anger and self-forgetting, called the perfectionist. And the perfectionist is the internalization. It's called righteous indignation. It's sort of like always have to live up to rules and being self-critical. And if you ask perfectionists what they desire, they'll say, I want to do the right thing. And I say, well, what happens if we forget the right thing, and we forget your lists, and we forget early to bed and early to rise, and we forget improvement? We say, what do you desire? And of course, the perfectionist hasn't even considered the question typically, what I really desire, or what am I passionate about outside of being the one who has to be responsible and always getting things done on time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we now have taken us through a brief journey again. Now we have to add the deepest level of all. And the deepest level of all is about basic human needs. And in the Enneagram, that's called subtypes. And why they are the most deep of all of the motivations, you could say, is they're really about survival if you look at our ancestors. So there were 3 things that we needed to survive, right? We needed to preserve, that's called I need food, I need shelter, I need all the things that go with that, because of course, if I don't have those things, I don't survive. So I have to uh, preserve me and mine. And then I need to be able to connect, which in the Enneagram is called a sexual subtype. But really, from my point of view, it's about intense connection that has an erotic feel for it. But I would say anything you're intensely erotically, meaning alive, connected with, qualifies. So, from my point of view, although this is not standard necessarily, I would say when a mother and a baby are looking at each other, there's an intensity to it, and the rest of the world goes away. I would say that qualifies as what I'm talking about, because there's the intensity of connection. And of course, without that kind of connection, we don't create babies. And once we create them, we don't have them survive because they don't connect with us. So they need a particular other to connect with. And then the third fundamental basic human need is to be part of a clan, to belong. Because if you don't have your clan, you don't participate and belong in your clan, you're left out in the cold, so to speak. And it's very hard to survive. So these are the most basic human drives, and they're called subtypes in the Enneagram. And there are three of them called, as we said, self-preserving and sexual, which from my point of view is about a kind of erotic connection, which sexual subtypes tend to like sex more than the other two types do, but the other two subtypes, but that's not always the case, obviously. So there's the sexual subtypes, and then there's the social subtypes, and they really compulsively need to belong and participate. So now let's look at the energies of these, and you'll find out why it is that they're so important. And then we'll have this three-layered energetic that we could really understand anybody from the inside out if we understand all the energetics. So if we start with the sexual subtype, their energy lasers forward and out. I want to connect deeply and intensely. And as far as I'm concerned, if I'm a sexual subtype, it's going to be through the eyes, and the rest of the world should just go away if I'm, a really intense sexual subtype. And so there's this energy that lasers forward and out, looking to connect with the other. Now, of course, why would I do that compulsively? Why would I compulsively need to connect? And really, it's a way of not feeling some anxiety about a fear, which is a kind of inner disconnection. So if you strip away everything externally that a sexual subtype can connect with, a sexual subtype can get very, very anxious because there's nothing to connect with. So the only thing they have to connect with is their inner sense of disconnection. Sort of like, I feel disconnected inside, and that's very, depressing. And I'd have to be able to sit with the pain of disconnection. And if I could do that, of course, then I wouldn't compulsively need to connect, which would mean I'd actually connect as opposed to connecting as a way not to experience, to make sure I never experience this inner sense of disconnection. So that's the sexual subtype. And the self-preserving type goes back and in. So it means in order to, what I'm going to first do is I have to incorporate something. If we're having a conversation, it's going to be much more comfortable if I receive something, if I take something in as nourishment, and then I can put something out. So if you want to, connect with me deeply, first you have to feed me, so to speak, and then maybe I can connect deeply. Or you have to, if I'm going to be, doing something in the world, I have to make sure first that we're prepared for inclement weather or whatever. So, and then maybe I can participate, but first I have to make sure that these fundamental, basic needs for security are there. And so what's going on? Why does somebody have to compulsively make sure that there's enough resources? And what I think you'll find is there's a basic insecurity, like, that I will never have enough resources. I can always end up in the streets. And and there's the terror of that, that I won't even, I have no security, and I'll end up, in great harm. So that's the self-preserving type. And then there is what's called the social subtype, and the social subtype loses itself what we call up and diffuse. It means, it's like I belong, therefore I am. I have to participate. I have to be part of the group activity. I'll either create it and or participate in something because, when I'm with my belonging, when I'm with my group, when I'm social, I feel alive. But when that's taken away from me, there's this inner sense of unbelonging, like I belong nowhere, and the terror of belonging nowhere. So, of course, compulsively, I have to always belong somewhere. So, in order to free ourselves of the compulsion of these drives, we have to sit with the thing that they're covering over and making us not feel anxious about, all of which is internal, right? a basic internal sense of insecurity, a basic internal sense of disconnection, a basic internal sense of unbelonging, that I belong no place. And so I compulsively have to take care of those needs by doing whatever I'm doing, which of course means I never get to really do it, as I said, because I'm doing it in part in order not to experience fear. Now, the next thing to say about these subtypes is they're stacked. So, you can be very extreme in one and very low in the others. I'm fairly extreme. I mean, I haven't quantified it, but, in that world, I'm probably like 3/4 sexual and 20% social and 5% self-preserving. So it adds up to 100. So I'm a pretty intense sexual subtype, which means left to my own devices. That's why I'm talking to each of you individually, even though it seems like I'm talking to all of you. I'm actually having a conversation with each of you. Now, why this is important, first of all, is if all you knew that was this, you would know an awful lot about people and their interactions. I mean, if you had people at a party, God forbid, right? Well, the self-preserving types are going to be the ones who make sure that there's enough food, enough drink, umbrellas, all the things that have, that the grounds will be kept up so that, no one will trip. There will be, working on the grounds, doing whatever, so that all of those preserving things are taken care of. And once that happens, then they can do something else. So that's what, if you're a self-preserving type and you're going to some kind of event, that's what you'd be likely to do, all things being equal. And if you're a sexual subtype and you're a pretty intense sexual subtype, you'll go to the event, but you'll look for the most interesting person and hopefully another sexual subtype, if you're lucky from your point of view, and you will go off and have this very intense, deep conversation of some kind or another, and the rest of the world will go away. And um, if you're a social subtype, you will participate, you will make sure that the dancing is happening, or you will organize or play in the softball game, or whatever the group activity is, you'll organize it and participate in it, and that will be that. So it's a communal deal. Now, the energetics of this get very, very interesting. Let's take the most obvious ones, right? It's like you have a sexual subtype and a self, I'll start with social. A social subtype are at a party. Well, the sexual subtype will be talking with one other person. And of course, the social subtype will wander over because it's sort of as a cocktail party from their point of view. And the sexual subtype will feel like this person is intruding. And the social subtype will think that the sexual subtype is rude because they are excluding them. And of course, none of this gets talked about. But where it really gets dicey is, of course, if you're getting married, and this is the situation, because if you're a sexual subtype, you're going to want to be all by yourselves, and you're going to have a very intense, intimate moment. Whereas if you're a social subtype and you're really a social subtype, you might, uh, put on a billboard in a stadium, will you marry me, Susie? In front of 60,000 people, because it's like a communal event. So you can only begin to imagine the difficulties that arise when two people are fairly stuck in their deepest, basic human needs, what's called their deepest instinctual drives. you know. And the self-preserving type, of course, with either of them is going to say, I have to take something in first, or I have to do something that's responsible first before we do anything else. So I'm the one who's going to like look to receive something, to take something in, so I may not initiate conversation, or if I do, it's more likely to be the kind of conversation that people talk about when they say, we talked about the weather or food or whatever, because of course that's your way of caring. If I really love you, if I'm a self-preserving type, I'm going to make you a great meal, or I'm going to make sure your home is a place that you feel welcome and home. It's like, that's how I'm going to say I love you. you know and either the two of us will say, well, that's nice, but that's not love to me. Love to me, if I'm a social subtype, is going to be saying, like, I'm going to, introduce you and incorporate you into my group, because that's an act of love. And a sexual subtype is going to say, like, an act of love is we're going to be, deeply connected intensely, and the rest of the world can go away. And as far as we're concerned, we may never eat, and we may never, I mean, if we're really intensely that, why would anyone want to be part of a group? I'm the most interesting person there is, so why would I want to do anything else? And why eat if we're having this amazing deep connection? Now, of course, there's so much more to say about all that stuff, but I'm going to leave it alone, except to say that things can get very confusing because, under certain circumstances, of course, since we have all of these drives, it's how we're in relationship with each of them. And of course, when people fall in love, they all, for a short period of time at least, look like they're sexual subtypes, you know. But, if you really are a sexual subtype, you think that that falling in love feeling is going to be there forever. But if you happen to get together with a self-preserving type, that may last for 3 or 4 weeks. And then they say, okay, now we have to start, building our life here. And we have to start, creating a home and doing the responsibilities. And you say, wait a second, what happened to my intense lover? And they say, well, for 3 or 4 weeks, yeah, that was good, but you have to live. So there's untold confusion here because the sexual subtype would say no, this should be going on forever. And it's the same if you're with a social subtype, because they'll become a sexual subtype for short periods of time if they fall in love, but then they'll say, okay, now it's time to do my group collective activity. And I want you to notice also something parenthetically, which is that this has nothing to do with extroversion or introversion, because you can be a social subtype, for example, and be an introvert. All that means is you'll naturally want to belong and participate, but in order to get rejuvenated, you're going to have some alone time. But you have your alone time, and then you'll compulsively go back and participate in whatever's going along. If you're extrovert, you never have to have your alone time because you're getting animated by what's happening in the group as opposed to getting exhausted by it. But the real thing we can now do is we could take any person, and if we knew their Enneagram type, which would mean we would by definition know their center, and we knew their subtype energy, we would really have a very good sense of what's going on with them. I mean, so much so that you would be like a psychic and you could tell them how they're in relationship to themselves and how they're in relationship with everybody else. And there's even a word that would describe it, and you would know that word about them, and they'd say, oh my goodness, how do you know so much about me? And you would say, well, I'm just a psychic, but in fact, it's not that you're just a psychic because you know their energy. So, if you take an extreme one, because they don't build on each other, but they do become more and more in one direction, but they don't cancel out, so you can have one that goes up and diffuse, one that goes forward and out, one that goes back and in, but it's not like the back and in is canceling out the forward and out. They don't, they're sort of stacked. It's like a kaleidoscope in that way. Um, So, but what I was saying here is that you could really know something about someone. So let's take an extreme, one that all of what they do is go forward and out, which would be in this case a sexual giver. Because a giver is a hard point, so I have to go out towards you, right? Because I need your acceptance, and I have to go out to the particular you because I need your acceptance. I need, for my sense of worthiness, I have to take care of your needs, right? Whatever you need me to be, I will be. I mean, you want me to be an intellectual, I'll give it my best shot. You want me to be a sex object, I'll do that. I mean, and you want me to cook for you, I'll do it, but I'm doing it not to cook for you. I'm doing it for the connection. So you better appreciate it, not the food, the me that's doing it, but it's just loving you because I want this connection with you, right? And if I'm a sexual subtype, what I want is deep connection. And there's a word for that in the Enneagram that captures that trinity, and that word is called aggressive seduction. Or if you talk to any self-respecting sexual too, they'll say, I know the person I wanted, and I could get them. I wanted their approval, but my little secret is that I'm going to take care of their needs. So I'm going to look like I'm, the one who's not needy at all, but they're the one who has needs, and I will make sure I take care of those needs. And I will make sure I do it in a way that is deeply, deeply connecting. So all of this energy is moving forward, you know. But let's say, we'll take a different sexual. So let's say you have a sexual 7, for example. All right, so let's look at that. A sexual 7, basically, their sevenness goes forward and out, their head point goes back and in, and their sexual subtype energy goes forward and out. So the least powerful of these is going to be the point. Right? We know that it's nested in the center, so the center has to be deeper than the personality. So we could say on the surface, what's going to happen is a seven is going to say, I want to have these wonderful, pleasant options. And they're going to go out and find very interesting things to do, and all kinds of interesting things to do. Of course, as a head type, they want to make sure that the options are pleasant because they don't want to include anyone who's going to be a downer, right? So there's sort of like, there's this push pull going on, going out there, as a seven looking for all these pleasant things, but I want to make sure I'm not trapped in it. But if I'm a sexual subtype, I also want to connect with you deeply. And the word for that is called suggestibility or fascination. So it looks like, I have this deep connection with you, right? Sexual subtype is the deepest part of me. I want to connect with you deeply. But then, of course, what happens is I have to diffuse that a little bit because, like, if we connect too deeply, it might become painful. So then I have to kind of pull away from you, but I want to pull away from you in a way that looks sort of like I'm not really pulling away because I want to be fraudulent about it a little bit. So I'm going to make it look like I have these pleasant options that we can do together. Meanwhile, I'm pulling back a little bit from too much intensity. And all of that is folded into this. So if you knew, that you had a sexual seven and a sexual two and they got together, well, you could be predictive about what their relationship is going to be like. And you would be correct. And in fact, if you knew their points and if you knew what's called their wings, like how much they're influenced on the points on either side of them, and what happens, how much do they experience stress for whatever it is that's stressful for them and how secure do they feel, you would have like this whole amalgam of information. Plus, if you knew how much healing work they had done, which in this case just means dealing with the things that they're most afraid to experience about themselves, right? So if you have the sexual two, right, there are going to be a lot of the core fears of the sexual subtype is disconnection. So the question is, how much has that sexual two really, really, how much is he, let's say he, because there'll be a stereotype. I mean, the fascinating thing, of course, is parenthetically that in our experience, type trumps everything. So if you had a sexual two man with a self-preserving five woman, which, is back, and back energetically, and you saw a transcript of their conversation, you would stereotypically be sure the man was the woman and the woman was the man, because the man would be saying something like, "You don't tell me you love me enough," and the woman would be saying, "Oh my God, there's so many demands here. It's like, I told you I loved you once, and like, wasn't that enough?" And you would be like, "You keep making these demands, and no matter what I do, it's not going to be enough." Um, and you're not really feeding me at all because you won't give me some space. And really, you would think the man was the woman and the woman was the man if you didn't know about the energetics of these things. But the point here is that, if you have the sexual two and the sexual seven, you'll say, well, they're going to really get together very intensely in the beginning. But that two is going to keep going forward. And the seven's going to say, wait a second, this is feeling like, like a little bit manipulative, where I'm like, there's too much going on here. And it's like getting a little painful and a little like trappy. And then they're going to pull away. And but they're going to try to pull away in a way that's going to look like they're going to diffuse the situation and create some pleasant options, meanwhile not wanting to be quite as intense. And the two, if the two hasn't done their work, will just forge forward ahead, and the seven will back off. And the more the seven backs off because they're a head point and they're saying, there's too many demands here, and then the two will go forward, and then the two will get resentful and at some point and say, you don't appreciate me, and then would go to the lower aspect of eight and get unbelievably angry because you're not appreciating me enough, the man's saying. And at that point, the seven is saying, oh, I don't need this. This is really painful, right? And the seven at that point is going to become critical. And because the seven will go to the lower aspect of one, and you can just imagine what that relationship is going to look like. All of which is predictable. And then the question is, here's the key question. How much do you realize that you're the one who's creating the thing as opposed to you're just reacting? Because everything is your creation. You say, I'm this way because that person was that way. That's crazy. You're the way you are because you're the way you are. And anything you say, oh, I'm that way because of someone else, is just to some rationalization in terms of what I'm talking about here, not in terms of other things, but in terms of how I fundamentally, see my needs getting met and how I perceive the world, and how what motivates me. None of these things are about the other person. They're all about you. And the sooner you realize that, the freer you'll be. Because then you can really sit with all the things you're most afraid to experience about yourself. No one will be able to push your buttons. And that is the whole point, that you be free. So you can respond and not react. And that's the point of all of this, is freedom. So what I would suggest you do, since we're talking about subtypes today, is really reflect on yourself and say, when I really look at myself, what motivates me the most is sort of kind of preserving security and to feel secure around things that are sort of, basic human needs of security, like food, shelter, all of that stuff. Or is my energy always looking to connect deeply with someone, which might be a sexual subtype, I would say? Or do I want to just participate and belong? And if you could do that, then you can get a sense, and then somebody else wouldn't seem rude or superficial or whatever. They would just be experiencing the world through a different lens. Not better or worse, just different. Having said that, guys, we've now finished our little journey on the Enneagram, which has been a joy to share with you. And once again, I welcome your comments. If you want to know more about the Enneagram, we have a lot of great information on our website, lifecenteredtherapy.com. We have a whole section on the Enneagram, writings about it, taking tests, everything you can imagine. And if you want to write to me, as always, Ahan, Andy Hahn at it's Ahan at lifecenteredtherapy.com. And I would love to hear your comments. And a lot of people have a lot of different feelings about the Enneagram. Man, this what I call the subtypes. Very different, because I say the way to understand them is energetically. And the energetics, which I told you, other people will say, no, that's not it. It's really about the drives. And, say they're called instinctual drives because they're biological. And I would actually say they just appear to be biological, but they're really energetic. And the thing is, of course, that if you can really be with the energetics of it, it's why there are these yogis that don't need to eat very much. Right? Why? Because they've dealt with the energetics. So I would say the energetics creates the instincts. But that's a very controversial view. Anyway, I look forward to hearing from you guys. Ahan, lifecenteredtherapy.com. Be well until we meet again. Bye-bye.